Welcome to Refused Flank, a wargaming podcast exploring the intersection of competitive excellence and narrative storytelling potential.
They do the P500, Grant. P500.
All right, that's going to be the intro. I just recorded that.
Oh, you did? Okay.
All right, you can kick this one off.
Okay. This is Grant.
And Cam.
And we're Refused Flank. We are talking about something brand new to our cast today. We're going to dip our toes just a little bit into Hex and Counter Wargames. You heard it right, folks. We're not talking about miniatures today. Le gasp.
Talking about cardboard.
We're talking about cardboard. We're talking about
but
shits.
Slightly thicker cardboard. It's not a card game.
No. There are well, actually this game in particular does have some cards, but it's a very minor part of the game, and we'll get into that. So we haven't actually played this game yet. This is kind of our first impressions, and we're looking to play it in the near future.
What game? I'm on the edge of my seat,
Okay,
Grant.
we are playing Great Battles of the American Revolution by GMT Games, designed by Mark Miklos. Hopefully I said that gentleman's name correctly. This is a long-standing series at GMT Games. The first volume came out way back in 1998.
Wow.
And is still getting new volumes, which are basically battles or battle packs or whatever, even now. I think one is on their kind of pre-order system, which if you've not heard of GMT, they do more than just war games, but that's kind of their claim to fame, typically in the board gaming space. And they have a system called P500, which is basically they say, hey, here's a game we want to make. If we get 500 pre-orders, we will start printing it.
Okay.
So that's their way of basically, because they're a smaller company.
Kickstarter?
Yeah, way. They've been doing this for decades.
Nice.
So it's kind of
crowdfunding before it was cool.
Right, and it was basically like they would eventually make it or whatever, but that's how they fund their reprints too.
Oh,
so,
nice. Okay.
If you know, I think this is a re-release from 2017. This started as just a P500, and then they said how many people actually want it, right? Because we don't want to print.
Yeah, and then have a warehouse full of copies. Yeah,
exactly. So, and they usually print more than they sell initially, so that makes its way out to retail stores as well. But it pays for the print run or whatever. So it's not just limited run or whatever. But they've made some big games over the years. They did Twilight Struggle. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. That's one of their really big ones.
Yeah, it's like Cold War, right?
Yeah, 2008, I think. That was #1 on Board Game Geek for many years, I believe. But this is a long-running series, and it deals with, obviously, Great Battles of the American Revolution.
Oh.
So I picked up the Tri-Pack, which was released, I believe, in 2017. Yes, it was. A few years back. This is the first release of that, and this was basically they boxed 3 volumes into one. This is volumes 1 through 3, and they have even this year released a second Tri-Pack, which boxes, oddly, I think volumes, it's like 5, 7, and 8, I believe. So I don't know why they skipped 4 and 6, but they made it work. Maybe it's had to do with the size of the maps or whatnot, and they kind of redid everything, updated the rules, etc., etc. And then before we get into all the details, I just wanted to go over Mr. Miklos a little bit. He's an American game designer. This is kind of pulling from his Board Game Geek page. He's obviously known for this series of war games, but I think he's worked on and co-designed a few other things. Don't quote me on that. And he made his name. There's this thing called the World Board Gaming Championships. I think it happens even now in Pennsylvania, like annually. And it's this big convention thing, but it's not Gen Con. It's not 70,000 people going. It's like 2,000 people going. But while there are just normal board games and stuff there too, it's a big wargaming thing. They have tournaments for these types of games, and it's like once a year, but it's really lighthearted. And he, I think, was a big guy there. And
So when they say championship, they don't mean cutthroat, hardcore.
I don't think so. If you look up videos online, it looks like a really bunch of friendly old beardy guys.
It makes sense when it comes to Hex and Counter Wargames.
Yeah. So, and I always find that really interesting. But he
and do you mean bearded or beardy?
I think
those mean different things in wargaming.
That's true. Good point. I should say bearded. I don't know. I've never met any of them. But I would assume just bearded and not beardy in the traditional sense. But he won tournaments for like an old Avalon Hill war game, 1776, another which I actually own also.
All right.
And so he was the world championship back in the day or whatever. So he's obviously a big fan of the Revolutionary War and has probably studied it for quite some time. And he's been releasing games in this series for literally decades now. And what's cool about this series, at least for me getting into it and researching it, has been that because of that history, they've had time to iterate and iterate and iterate and get their core rules to a really streamlined state. I'll be honest, I had a little bit of difficulty understanding it. I have an interesting thing where Hex and Counter Wargames, I think because they use things like combat resolution tables, which I'll try to explain for many wargamers who is like, what is he talking about? I kind of was there too, because I'm used to, I hit on a 3+, I wound on a 4+, you take your armor save,
and now you're dead.
And now you're dead or whatever, or okay, I'm strength 12 with power, whatever, and then I need to roll over your armor, see how much damage I do, that sort of thing. This is like, okay, I need to count my odds. Then I find my spot on the odds table of this combat chart. Then I roll one dice, consult the chart where that die, like, oh, I got a 5. I go to the 5 row on this column. Okay, that gives me a result of ML or something. And it's like, what is ML? And it's like, oh, that means morale loss. So it's like, okay, morale loss occurred. And that's like combat resolution. So very different, right? And I struggled in kind of grokking that, wrapping my head around it. But I persevered here because I really want to get into this type of stuff. I imagine myself an old man if my eyes have failed me. I can't paint so well anymore, but I can buy a boxed board game.
How are you going to read the counters, though, if your eyes aren't so good?
Dang it. I'll have to get, like, bifocals or something. I don't know.
Big magnifying glass. Yes. I guess you can just put the whole thing under a big mirror.
There you go.
Or not mirror, lens.
I know some people, I have a mounted map board, but if they just do paper maps, they'll put, like, big plexiglass on top to keep it flat. So maybe I'll just get, like, convex. So it's
with, like, a slight magnification.
It'll just zoom it all in for me.
Yeah. Anyways, with the Hex and Counter Wargaming in general, you own several different Hex and Counter Wargames. I own none.
Yeah.
How many have you played? Like, what's your experience level? I think the only thing that would really count, I played Dawn Patrol when I was a kid. My brother had a copy of that, which was an old Hex and Counter flight game, like World War I dogfighting. And I've played a few computer game versions of, like, I think I had like a demo of Panzer Leader computer version or something like that, and some of the Warhammer 40,000 Hex war games that were computer war games like that.
Oh, cool.
So I think that's like the same mechanics kind of happening underneath a little bit, but I've never played a physical, like, this type of Hex and Counter. Like, what's your experience level with these things?
So honestly, not a lot more than you. I've been an admirer from afar for a long time. I played some really old Avalon Hill stuff, which maybe some listeners are like, well, yeah, super OG. I've got 1776. I've got an original squad leader from the 70s. I've got the Battle of Bull Run. I've got this tiny little baby game about a battle from Napoleon. I can't remember which one it is. And I found most of these used. Of course, I guess you can't find new Avalon Hill anymore. But just like in the backs of shops for like heavily discounted. And I'm like, oh, that looks cool. And I've picked them up, kind of laid out the maps, and then kind of pushed the counters around as I looked through the rule book without even knowing if I've got a complete game always all the time.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And then as I got more into board gaming last decade, while also playing things like War Machine and stuff and whatnot, I got really into board gaming too. And I kind of had a different group for either side or whatever. There was some crossover, but I eventually got into more and more complicated stuff. And I just, like we described with Warhammer Fantasy 6th edition, I got really enthralled by like how rules in a system and physical components can teleport me mentally someplace else and make me feel like I'm doing something other than just sitting at a table.
Yeah. It's interesting talking about this a week after talking about one-page rules, which kind of went the opposite direction, where it's like, is it making me feel anything, or is it just telling me which dice to roll? Whereas this, like you're saying, is attempting to model a very specific thing to the point that each battle has like its own supplement of rules to help you feel that, like, no, this battle was different in these ways, so we're actually going to have these new rules for this battle.
Right. And just board games in general and their ability to do that, and by extension, war games too. It's
Yeah.
like, how do we make mechanics make you feel like you're doing something like big and lofty, or you're teleported someplace else through the theming, etc. And I find that all really interesting, and I think a lot of other people do too. But war games have, especially these more traditional Hex and Counter ones, have a reputation of being really obtuse, difficult to learn, and they take a long time. In fact, I think it's many war gamers for this would say they play solo. They play against themselves because they can't always get opponents super easily, or they just prefer it. I don't know. I won't.
Yeah, and I think my understanding, at least, correct me if I'm wrong here, is that a lot of these aren't necessarily trying to be tightly wound competitive experiences that have balanced forces, but more correctly modeling a historical encounter. And so it is a little easier to just play the best you can for both sides against yourself than maybe it would be in something that's more perfectly balanced competitive.
It depends on the game for sure. Like, they do run tournaments for this for sure. And what's cool about this system is there's different scenarios. So this, we have laid out in front of us right now the map for the Battle of Saratoga, which is the volume 1. And there's multiple scenarios in this box just for this board. You could do like the actual main battle. You could do the day after, which is different.
Okay, so volume 1, Saratoga, came with multiple scenarios.
Correct.
I see. Okay.
So it's like you could play, it's not just one battle, you set it up the same way every time. I mean, you could do it that way, but there's options.
That's cool.
And certain other ones give you different options there, and they might have different, again, more tiny rules. Like, oh, maybe the day after, I think there's one where it's like they had limited ammunition, so they came with little chits where you track, okay, after these guys shoot, they can't shoot anymore because they didn't have enough after the first volley or whatever to model that or whatever, but that's not in the main rules. So there's all these little tweaks and little things they do that get me all really excited.
Yeah, is the way that they then, in the sort of asymmetrical situations, determining a winner, is it like just different objectives? Like, I just need to not die for 3 turns and you need to take this city or something like that.
It can be that. There's oftentimes different objectives. In this game in particular, which I guess I should knuckle down and start talking about this series specifically and not at large. What's cool about this is there's typically different levels of a victory. So you can get like a decisive victory or whatever, which is like very difficult. That's like you pummeled the other side. I think I read somewhere a guy was like, that's probably not going to happen unless maybe your opponent is incompetent / doesn't know what they're doing and you do. And you kind of bash a noob, for lack of a better word. But then there's I forget, like a decisive, it's like decisive, major, and then like minor victory, kind of like Warhammer, honestly, laid out that way. And there's different ways you can do it. Here it is: decisive, substantial, and marginal.
Okay.
So how I would imagine most victories occur would be substantial, which is by lowering your opponent's army's morale to 0. So you track a force's entire morale kind of on a sliding chart there. And then there's different major levels. You start off typically, and again, I'm only looking at one volume in front of me. Each volume could be different. So what I might be saying for Saratoga could maybe be very different for Brandywine, potentially. I haven't in-depth compared them. Just putting that asterisk out there. But essentially, you might start at your army's at high morale, and then all the units get a little morale bonus while the whole army is there. Okay. But then once the army passes into normal morale, then they've lost their bonus, and eventually they'll go to low morale. And if they ever hit 0, you just lose. Your force is going to leave the battle.
Yeah. Okay.
And how that can occur is just through combat. Like I think I told you,
morale loss.
Morale loss. So it's like, oh, okay, and that's modeling, because again, each chit isn't like 10 guys. Each chit, each strength point is the term they'll use, can represent several hundred soldiers. So, because this game's at a really interesting scale. I really love the scale. Sorry, it sounded weird, but one of the things I don't like about Warhammer and miniature wargaming, at least at 28 millimeter scale, the way we typically play, is I don't get a sense of the wide sweepingness of a battle. Here, they've zoomed out, I feel like, perfectly to where reinforcements are going to arrive and they're going to affect the battle, and we'll get to see them, and you'll get choices. Do you want to go down that way? Do you want to go down this path? Do you want to go through the forest, very dense forest, et cetera, et cetera? And I could see almost the entire board being touched, large parts of it anyway, each time you play this. And I find that really fascinating, where miniature wargaming, again, at 28 millimeter scale, I feel like those sorts of movements and strategic considerations aren't really in play.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that really interesting because we're seeing not just kind of like, I always think of 40K, like there's a bigger battle and we're zoomed in on one spot maybe. Whereas this is like, okay,
this is the whole battle.
This is the whole battle. And I find that really interesting.
If people aren't on the map, they're not coming.
Right. And I find that interesting. Although there are guys that show up throughout this battle.
Yeah, there are reinforcements.
Yes. And I just find that really interesting. I love the scale of it. But that's how you're typically going to win the game. And then there might be a marginal victory, which is some kind of potentially through leader losses, et cetera, et cetera. There are different rules for different scenarios. In Saratoga, the British are coming from the north and they're trying to go down south and take some hexes over that are marked with a big red star. Whereas the American forces could potentially push forward and take a hex marked with a blue star to try and get points, but they're going to be more defensive because they have some rules because narratively their general was like, we're not moving. I'm not moving. And there's some randomness there to where you might, it says Gates release. Is it on the turn track here? When he releases his troops to actually move, basically. Okay. So the American is really, you can't move. You're defensive. There's a few guys like with Benedict Arnold, because this is his famous battle before he turned turncoat, right? His whole like kind of sub force is out ahead and moving and actually doing things, whereas the main general is kind of like, I'm not moving, we're holding our defensive posture, and then eventually he finally releases, and that occurs on a random turn that you kind of determine. So it's following the historical narrative, but it's not like, okay, turn 8 every time.
Yeah, you have to move this here or that there. And
you still have choice, and a lot of choice.
That's really interesting. I think that's something that's maybe missing from a lot of typical miniature war game scenarios, which end up being much more generic, as there's a lack of context of why we're here and what our motivations are. And so this idea that you can have sort of an asymmetrical conflict, but also pull in some of that friction historically, that this general just was this way and you're not that general. So like you need to be beholden to how.
And he resented Benedict Arnold, and they didn't like each other.
Impetuous and So yeah, I think that's really fascinating and maybe good inspiration for writing or jazzing up some miniature wargaming scenarios to add some of that
for sure
as well. But I think the big thing is really, that context for why we're here. It's not just, there's a random blue star there, so I guess I care about blue stars, so I'm going to go capture blue stars. It's like, no, that represents a specific space that maybe has strategic value, and that sort of a thing. But yeah, that's really interesting. I think that then it's interesting just thinking about playing this competitively, and like you're saying, in a tournament setting.
Yeah,
and
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, dialing in a scenario design so that you can feel like all of that's still happening, but there's still this balance regardless of which side you're playing. And I think a lot of that maybe does come down to what is it that we're actually attempting to do? What are our goals on the battlefield today? And a lot of generic war game scenarios are just like, just kill everybody, or just like hold these 3 spots.
That's what it feels like a lot of the time. No matter what you do. And again, I think it's partly because of the scale, especially with 28 mil. We just don't have the room. Unless you're playing on a huge table with like 2 mats linked together, and then you have a different set of problems, right? Of just logistics.
It's gonna take you 3 days.
And all that. Because of the nature of the medium, we're able to kind of interface with a conflict in a different way that I really like the idea of.
Yeah, well, I'm already intrigued.
Okay.
Hit me with some more of the details.
Okay, so let's go through. These were just some mechanics that I thought stood out to me as being very different from like... maybe not even different, but highlights that I wanted to highlight to our listeners who are probably mostly miniature war games, which is fine because I think we are too.
Yeah.
One big thing that was something I had trouble wrapping my head around is this idea of zones of control. And this is this idea of a unit is like a little rectangle, right? A little chit on a hexagon somewhere in the map. And all the 6 hexagons surrounding that chit, as long as that chit is in parade order, which is like typical, it's not disordered or shattered or whatever at a negative.
Ready to go.
Right.
Good morale.
Anybody enemy unit who tries to walk next to that unit then just has to end their turn. You can't kind of like sneak around it.
Well, players of the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game will be familiar with that
they?
because they have control zones.
How far around does that extend?
1 inch around every model.
So imagine that, but like, again, the scale, thinking that way, it's this idea of you can actually kind of defend narrow passes.
Influence,
But there's rules for that too, to where it's like if you're in the open and there's woods to your left, you don't control the woods to your left, so they might be able to sneak through by you on your left flank on the woods.
So terrain interacts with that.
Exactly. So a lot of these things kind of flow together, but it also prevents weird, unrealistic encirclements where you have like, I don't know, maybe a cavalry unit like just jet through, whereas in reality they would have probably eaten a bunch of musket balls or whatever.
So that was the problem that can happen in a lot of modern miniature war games where it's like, well, my charge distance allows me to go past you and then circle back around behind you, and it's just like, what is happening? That makes no sense.
And that's a pretty common thing, I think, in these types of games, this idea of zones of control, and it incentivizes lines of units and supporting each other, etc. Also, I highlighted the movement. There's just on a chit, I almost want to just pull one out to look at it, but there's really only 3 stats. There's a morale, which is usually like 0 is normal, which means there's no plus or negative modifier to that unit's morale. There would be something bad would be like -1. Maybe that would be like American militia units. And then there'd be like +1, which would be like British line infantry.
Okay.
And then there would be a number dash another number. And the first number is your strength points, which is, again, that's your combat statistic. And then the second number is how many hexes you can move. And every turn or whatever, you move all your hexes or all your chits up to their movement value, and each hex, depending on terrain, costs more than 1 point to move into, etc., etc. So pretty simple, but there's a lot of options like strategic movement, so certain hexes will allow for that. Typically in this scenario there's a lot of roads and paths, so if you stay along a road or path the entire time, you can double your movement. So it's like, I feel like that sort of system exists a lot in miniatures war games, even in things like BattleTech, where they're like, hey, if you walked along the road, you get +2 hexes of movement or whatever. But I feel
again,
like
at the scale, it rarely makes sense to do that or to go anywhere in particular.
Or you forget. Here, it makes so much sense, and I feel like it was really intentionally placed because, there's might be conflict happening down here, but British might receive reinforcements there at like clear other side of the board, but they might still make it in because they're going to be moving double time down the road.
But then that creates interesting choke points of like, well, we know where the roads are, so we can defend those, and then you got to decide, well, at the end, are we going to cut through the woods at the last little bit just so we don't come out right on the road? So interesting.
And then also I wanted to highlight, I'm not like pro hex versus just a mat on a board. But the thing I do like about a board game with just a hex grid is that it gets rid of the waffliness of movement that we sometimes,
where you're just now thinking about half millimeters. And,
you get the feel bad. And I think we as a group, we always say we do a really good job handling that. But I think it'd be, it does sometimes, it's like, oh, this is annoying.
There's moments where it's, it crops up.
And whereas this, it just eliminates that intrinsically. Because it's, okay, I'm here or I'm not here. There's no question. There's no ambiguity. It removes that, and I like that sometimes. Sometimes the ambiguity can be fun, but in movement...
I think especially at this kind of scale, that just removes one area of complexity to allow for some other areas of complexity.
Sure. And then the third thing I wrote was that army morale thing, and I think that's cool. It's almost, in this system, it's really cool because you'll lose it as units die or are damaged or whatnot, but then... if units flee, if they then later rally, you'll gain morale back. So it can it'll go down and then it might pop up a little bit again. And there's those 3 sections which affect individual unit morales, etc. So like as the army morale is going worse and worse, your units are less and less likely to actually rally.
Okay.
So it's like going to be this sliding scale where there might be like almost a tipping point you hit. At least that's what I imagine. Again, I haven't played it. There's going to be this tipping point where it's like, oh man, we're at low morale. Now all my units are at -2 and we rally on a 5-up.
Okay.
And then I'm also a militia who's -1 natively. So now my 6 that I roll is a 3. So I failed. Like it's impossible for these militia to rally or whatever, unless I have other modifiers like a leader nearby who gives me a +2 or whatever to kind of negate some of that. So there's a lot of, You see what I'm kind of getting at there?
Yeah, absolutely.
It becomes a game, and this might be, I don't want to talk about possible negatives yet, but it's like there's a lot of adding of different modifiers.
Okay.
And I think a lot of old school war games like that, or it's a lot of math where it's like, okay, I've got this modifier, that one, and you've got that one. And then we count up and we get two numbers and we compare them. Then you look at a chart and you roll one die and you find out what happens. And it's a lot of that over and over again.
Okay.
So if you don't like that like process, I could see this kind of wearing on someone.
Becoming tedious, yeah.
Potentially.
I guess we'll find out if we like this process.
Indeed. But that's kind of morale. Also, there's a stacking limit. This is maybe a concept that might be foreign to a miniature war gamer.
Unless you played Civilization.
Fair enough. Yeah, good point. But it's not quite Civ 4, but it's not Civ 5. So you can have some guys stacked, but the stack limit is always 6 strength points. So if you have British regulars with a 5 strength point, you can't put another British regular with 5 strength points in that same hex. They will not physically like fit. But if you had a tiny little, I don't know, scout unit with 1 strength point, he could go join them because, whatever. I don't know. And I think that prevents this kind of weird death balling that you could theoretically do where it's like, I'll just put 30 guys and then
now you can't do anything because I'll always have the odds.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be odds like 10 to 1. That's like just impossible now because of how this system works. So that stacking limit kind of removes that. There are ways leaders ignore that, so you can still get pretty high numbers for certain attacks if you really orchestrate yourself well. But generally speaking, it's going to be a lot of that maneuver to try and orchestrate and get your odds up, and then seeing what the dice give you, and then trying to make inroads based on what happens. I find that really interesting. And then
here's a question for you.
Go ahead.
When it comes to strength points, is that mapping more to manpower or more to like quality veterancy? Because I'm thinking, okay, so it's a little more abstract than just like 6 strength points is the number of people that fit in this square area.
It is a little bit more than that, but like, so
that kind of in some ways is interesting because you could only have the same number of bad militia, like strength points of bad militia versus strength points of quality British line infantry or something like that.
So you could stack more militia in one square because their strength points are going to be less.
But then it's the equal strength points,
right?
So then I guess like what's the? I don't know.
What I guess you could argue then is a British regular worth like 2 or 3 militiamen or whatever? And it's again, you're not really tracking casualties. Units are damaged and then destroyed, but it's like. And if you read Mark Miklos's what's really cool about GMT, I'm getting off topic here, is they're so infused with the history. Oftentimes there's books that just talk about the history of the battle, the prelude, what really happened, etc. If you want to are actually interested in the history, and they do so many things too. They've got games on wars that I've never even heard of and are fascinating, and I'm sure they're incredibly researched, and they often come with those scenario books that have dozens of pages on background. But he explains in that actually not a lot of people would die to musket fire. Most of the time it was people running away, that how these battles ended. So there would be bloodshed, but it was a lot of just oh man, the guys next to me are dying. There's more of them there. They actually know what they're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna go home because I'm a farmer or whatever, right? Or the British are like, oh man, they're all over. They're in the trees, man. Where are we? I don't know where I am. I'm from Liverpool. Get me out of here. I don't know. But
I guess I just don't know enough about the rest of the mechanics and how the game works, so I can't really make a judgment. But if I guess if I had a lot of militia and then you have a little bit of line infantry, I still can't maximize my overwhelming numbers of poor quality troops if I only can stack the same number of strength points as you.
What I would explain it as is think maybe strength points is more numbers, and then the morale adjustment is more quality. Because really the morale modifier is what's going to keep you actually in the fight, whereas the strength points are going to affect how well the fight actually goes.
Is there the possibility of doing a multi-hex attack?
Yes.
I have 2 stacks attacking your 1 stack?
Potentially. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, you
well,
could-
then that alleviates my concerns in that
so
sense.
there always has to be one hex being attacked or being attacked from kind of thing. It's like one or the other. But yeah, they have a lot of really great examples. But yeah, if you had two guys next to one target, they could both go boop.
Okay.
It's worth noting too, if you're next to somebody, your hex is adjacent, pretty much somebody's fighting. If you're adjacent, they're
There's a
fighting.
battle happening,
There's going to be a fight. Somebody's got to fight. There's a lot of these little cute small rules that are just chrome. You can do diversions, and that's like, okay, this unit is going to divert that one, and then there's not a fight there, but then any subsequent fights like over here get a benefit, but then also that unit who's doing the diversion gets a negative. It's a little complicated there, but it adds this cute little chrome there.
Yeah, some extra options, choices you can make that aren't just straight out fights.
Yeah, and then I haven't even gotten into there's rifle units that actually do what would be more traditionally seen as like ranged fire, where they shoot at something and then there's no return fire. So there's units for that. And then we talk about artillery, which is obviously a big deal here. What's really cool about this game is you shoot your artillery on the opponent's turn. It's always defensive artillery fire.
Interesting. Okay.
So they're moving up their guys, they do their rifle fire, and then you shoot your cannons.
I guess that's what you always see in the movies.
Right.
They're marching up the field and cannons are exploding around them.
But then it's your turn and you move your guys up and then they shoot their cannons. So it's kind of interesting how that all works and just how the game flows. And I feel like it's a system that I think through a little bit of what's the word, stubbornness, and actually really trying to grok the rules and maybe playing it a few times you could really internalize a lot of this stuff, because a lot of it's not that complicated. It's just, okay, add up some numbers, roll a die, look at this, what happened.
I guess I've found with a lot of things like this, it ends up feeling like there's a lot of things, but none of those things individually is that complex.
That's a good way to put it.
It's just more of them to know about at the outset. But it seems like the game has some good reference cards and cheats and things like that to help keep those foregrounded as you're playing.
Which is another thing I guess I should specify. What's cool about this game and was a little confusing to me at first is like certain parts of the core rules explain things like rifle fire, and it's like consult the ranged to hit table. And I'm like, okay, where is that? And I'm looking through the main rules and it's just not there. And then I came to the realization that it was on the battle specific player aids. But each one for each battle could be different. And I was like, at first I was like, oh, why would they do that? But then I like had the realization. I'm like, oh, well, maybe one battle it was like really foggy or something. So they did like an altered the table. And I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. I like that. And but when I was first reading it through, I'm like, where's the table I'm supposed to consult? It wasn't immediately apparent
and it seems like something that's generic enough it would be in the main rules.
Like, well, just tell me that, So it doesn't always do the best job, I think, maybe explaining that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But what's cool about, because this is such a long running system, there's so much, well, maybe not so much, but there's a decent amount of online material too for teaching and like reading about. So you can find YouTube videos kind of explaining this or watching people play it even. But I think my original point with that is this game comes just popped to the gills with player aids. It gives for each battle at least one for each player. So neither person who's playing the game will be bereft of rules references. It's not going to be like you're trading back and forth. You each get your own. And then it also, this tri-pack, I'm blown away by the value. They hit it out of the park. It comes with 3 of these mounted map boards, which are like pretty good size. And frankly, I really like the artwork. It's kind of minimalist, but kind of pretty to look at.
Yeah, I agree.
Very colorful, this battle. It's very green. The forests look quite dense.
Yeah, but it's all very clear what's what based on the map key, which is helpful.
Yes, which is, again, clearly displayed. And then I'm going to get back to my points here. Sorry, I'm going all over the place. Momentum chits. I know you kind of talked about this last week, where these caster chits and one-page rules where you can like alter a die roll. When we were talking about that, I was thinking about this in the back of my head, because there's momentum chits in this too, or whatever. And it's what this does is it allows you to re-roll that one die roll. But it's always the person, I believe, with less momentum has to pick first, but you can keep spending.
Okay.
So theoretically, the person who has more will always get the last say, but they would have to have spent more of them. So if you know this is a key fight, and they roll the die or whatever, and it's like, oh, I got a 1 and I needed a better than that, right? Because oh no, it could be something really bad depending on the odds, right? It could be like attacker is captured and you just like lost your unit, right?
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I got to spend some momentum to re-roll that, and they're like, I'll spend a momentum to like re-roll and you can just keep going back and forth. But theoretically, the person who has more will always.
How do you accumulate those?
That's usually done by you start with some, but then also I think killing certain units. It could happen if you kill a leader, which is another cool thing. I think a lot of miniature war games do this too, where like a leader is like attached, and then if that unit that it's attached to and supporting like takes a certain damage on that chart roll or whatever, it has an asterisk. It's like, oh, the leader died because he was in the battle or whatever supporting. Now he gave a die roll modifier, which could really benefit things, but if you just roll bad anyway and your odds weren't very good to begin with, he's might just dead.
Or captured or
right, and bad things will happen.
I like this idea of momentum tokens because it gives you a sense that the rest of the battle is contributing to how individual parts of it are going,
right?
And whether your whole army is feeling like they're winning or losing, and if they can push their advantage or not, etc. So yeah, I like this idea. I think it sounds like it will be useful mechanically, but also seems like it makes sense narratively.
It was one of those things where I was reading it and I'm like, wow, it does this too? But as I again tried to internalize more of the rules, and this was going to be more one of my final thoughts, but I'm just going to jump into it here because it feels right.
Yeah.
All these systems, it felt like, oh, the core is really simple, movement's really simple, combat's, once you really get what you're doing, is pretty darn simple. It's basically counting up numbers, rolling a die, see what happens, maybe retreat, etc., apply effects. But then all these weird bolted on systems like the momentum, the morale tracker, and then one thing I want to touch on, the tactical matrix. It's like, oh, whoa, why did we add all these things? But then they are kind of woven in together to where it's like leaders affect all these things. And it would be, I feel like they all are part of this functional whole, and removing one, you kind of lose something.
Okay.
It's really, I don't even want to call it modular. Every piece makes sense. It's all a piece of its own puzzle, and it doesn't feel extraneous after I think you see it all in play together, or at least really read through it, and you're like, oh yeah, that affects this over here too, and then that might affect that, and just all these different things. So again, that final big point I had was there's this tactical matrix. So when an attack happens, there's one final thing. There's these cards. And there's 8 cards per side, and this big shout out to this game because you can refuse your flank.
Nice.
But basically, when a battle occurs, each player picks like how they approach the battle, and that adds another modifier.
Okay,
so it's just
I like that, and that's like you just both are selecting individually and then reveal at the same time,
correct.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you put them face down and then you flip them.
Yeah.
But those can be affected in what you choose by the presence of a leader, whether you have a flank open, which means available, not in an enemy zone of control.
Okay.
So if you have an open flank and a leader, you can refuse your flank. That's an option. But if they don't have a leader nearby, they don't even get that option because they need a leader to be able to execute that battle of that or whatever
complexity. Yeah.
Right. So they might just be able to attack in echelon or stand fast or just straight up withdraw, which could be, I'm just going to run away. And then you can see that would be like, there's going to be no combat.
Yeah. Both players decide to withdraw. Well, then lo and behold, nobody fights.
Right. And then etc. But then it could be, if somebody stood fast, but the other person attacked in echelon, that might mean that the attacker is going to get a +1 on his die roll or whatever, or etc. Which could, again, that might kick that. You roll high. Oh, that's a 6. All of a sudden we're up to boom. Like really bad things can start happening. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's sort of a rock, paper, scissors-esque system, but it's not just I win, you lose, but it just adjusts the odds a little bit.
Yeah, and a lot of times, frankly, it looks like it's minor. It's like +1, -1, or is it even a 0 at times?
But that could be enough.
It's just another thing, and I think it's cool that there's really... I've read a lot of just random rule books from games kind of in this vein, and I've never seen anything quite like this, but it's almost like gambling or something, or bluffing. Bluffing's probably the right word. I like the bluff. You'd be like, oh yeah, I'm definitely, I'm doing a frontal assault for sure, but really you're withdrawing or whatever. And I just find that interesting. And I don't know. I think that's interesting from a game mechanic, maybe not always so much from the narrative of the battle, but maybe to that too. I don't know.
The scale
weird.
of the game, it seems like it could potentially
I suppose
still map
so.
to that.
Indeed.
There's another, I think Moonstone is a miniatures war game that has a melee resolution mechanic where you
really?
do a similar thing. It's like skirmish games. You only have a few models per side, but you have to select like the type of way you're attacking. And then it does a similar sort of outcome where like based on the 2 cards that get played, different things will happen in terms of if you're like throwing yourself out there, being more defensive and things. There's another Osprey game that I played once that does a similar thing, be like allocate, like I might have 8 attack dice or like combat dice, and I can decide how many are being defensive and how many are being aggressive, that sort of a thing. So any system that's attempting to do that, I really like, where it's not just a die roll, but you're getting to make a decision about how you're attempting to make this attack. Just adds another layer of tactical decision, which I think I like.
Right. Yeah, no, I think even me and a old buddy actually ended up making a skirmish game once. We never like published it or anything. This was just us like in high school,
sure,
making stuff up / maybe early college, and I forgot what we called it. It was like deathmatch or something. And we did something similar where it'd be like, depending on you'd hide a D6, and like up on 1 meant like overhead swing.
Nice.
And then like 2 meant like parry or whatever. I don't know. We had a defensive die chart and an offensive one. And so you'd attack, and then you'd pick what kind of attack you were making. And then they would pick the defense. And if you do overhead swing and they did sidestep, it's like, wow, you just got boned. But if they did like duck and you did overhead swing, now they're going to get wrecked. And that was like the core part of that system too. And I see a little bit of that here too. And I think it's fun how, I don't know, everybody kind of came up with these ideas independently or whatever. I wasn't aware of this game back there, but obviously, I just think that's a really cool system, I guess.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how it feels.
And then finally, I think overall the system does a really good job at simulating the battles. We kind of talked about this, but each battle has its own scenario rulebook. Saratoga starts off, I guess, originally, I'm not an expert, but it may have had fog in the morning, and that's represented in this game. You roll for the weather at the beginning, and that can affect things, and even when it lets up.
But that's not fair.
Right. That's true. But I think it is, though, if you think about it, because I'm sure Mr. Miklos, when he designed the game, he was like, well, you know what, we're trying to model this, but let's think about it in a reasonably fair sense too. So this does a lot of things that would be considered unfair to miniature gamers. The first 2 turns, the British only get to move. The Americans don't move the first 2 turns of the game, so they basically get a double turn to go. And that's just because, as we kind of noted narratively, the Americans were defensive here. They're trying to block the British from, I believe, going south towards, I don't remember which city. Don't quote me on this.
Got to read the background book.
Yeah, I guess I need to read it again. It's been a while, I admit. I was focused on the rule book. But they're blocking. They're traveling south, and they're kind of in the middle. They're blocking, right? They're heading down by this Hudson River. Mm-hmm. And so they're just waiting for them. And these guys they're progressing. They're moving through the fog. That could affect, though, the first few turns. Because, again, we talked about there's the strategic movement. So you think in 2 turns, that could be if you're a cavalry unit who's already moving, I don't know, 7, 8 hexes a turn. You could move 30 hexes or whatever, right? But it's like, you'll note like, oh, these bridges are cut. And, oh, how will that affect things? What are we going to do there? So you're going to have to make decisions on how you navigate through that. And, oh, over there, you'll note like this is a big starting position for a bunch of Americans. I'm pointing at the map for Cam here. Sorry, listeners. But it's like there's going to be a bunch of cannon there. So it's like, do you just run at this bridge that's been already destroyed and just try to ford it, but they got cannon over there shooting at you potentially? And I think that just talking about that, I can see it. And then it's like, or do you go through the woods? Do you like enter in? Do you take longer, but maybe it's safer, right? And it's just, I don't know.
And I mean, the variability on the fog certainly adds interest, because you might be expecting it to last another turn, and you put yourself out in the open because you have the cover of the fog, and then all of a sudden it disperses, and now you're caught out. Mm-hmm. It's
worth noting the fog will go away relatively quickly, but it's those first few rounds. Mm-hmm. It could definitely be there.
Yeah. I bring it up just because that's the type of thing that obviously a historical recreation of a scenario wants to model a thing that was actually the case there, and it doesn't necessarily even need to be fair.
Right.
Obviously, a well-designed game probably is attempting to balance something in some way where it feels right that that's happening and doesn't feel like you have absolutely no chance from the get-go. But again, also maybe comes down to what does it mean to achieve victory in some way, shape, or form in this scenario. Anyways.
I think that's a good point, because I think of this is, I'm going to relate it back to something we've been playing. We've been doing the Warhammer 40,000 4th edition campaign with our group, and I'm playing Night Lords with the 3.5 Ed Chaos book with their specific Night Lords rules, and they get night vision, right? That's like something they just get as an army. So if we ever do like a night fight, I just get this, it's not a huge bonus, but I get a bonus, right? And it's like, so if we ever play a night battle, do I just get an unfair advantage? Is that fair to the other player? How do we like navigate that? Because obviously
through scenario design,
right? So it's just interesting though that this is like already baked in, and it's, you don't have to think about that because Mr. Miklos has already done it for you.
Yeah, and, I'm not choosing to be the British out of 8 different factions I could choose to play here. It's just, no, these are the factions that were present. Yeah.
So I just think that's interesting. And through those simple things, just rolling a die on a chart and just being like, oh, okay, what's going to happen here? Again, tells that story. Yeah. And I got maybe not chills, but I got excited just imagining like the first few rounds, like, oh, there's the American bulwark. They're over there way down in the south end of the board, and the British are going to be just maybe not pouring down from the north, but streaming down from the north, and they've got some German Hessian like mercenaries that are going to be more out in the woods. And then there's this Freeman's Farm area that was historically hotly contested, and I know the Americans get some extra VP if they hold there. So it's like, Benedict Arnold, is he going to run over there and do stuff, or is he going to be more reserved? And you're able to make those decisions. And I see the narrative, I see all that, and I get really excited about it. And what takes it further, almost in the same way, when we get really into fantasy or 40K, I get into the lore more too. I get excited about it. I want to maybe read a novel, or I'll look up a short story or something, and I'll read through that when we're like really into a campaign. I like read through the Night Lords Omnibus during our one thing. Recently, or during our campaign. I finished that up recently just because I'm getting into the lore and I like that, right? This makes me want to like read about this battle and like learn about it and be like, oh, what really did happen here? Because I'm not an expert, but I'm enthralled by looking at it, and I realize in looking at it that how little I know about it, because all I know about Saratoga is that's where Benedict Arnold won, and that was like a big upset, and the British were like, oh crap, this isn't going to be an easy war, because this is relatively early into the conflict or whatever. But beyond the very superficial high level stuff, like just looking at the terrain, I'm like, what, did this take place in the middle of like a giant forest? Maybe it did, I don't know, I haven't looked at the maps, but according to this, it seems to have. So I find that all really interesting, just looking at the terrain and marveling at it. I guess as somebody who hasn't really, have you looked at the rules at all?
I've read through half of them.
Okay, as somebody who's relatively new to this and hasn't really, maybe, is it fair to say, internalized the rules very much? Fair. What is your thoughts on the outset? Because I think for a lot of people, they look at this and either their eyes glaze over or they're incredibly intimidated. Even people who I would say are miniature war gamers at times. I bring out stuff like this to people who I'm like, hey, would you be interested in this? And they're like, oh yeah, for sure, yeah. And then it like never happens. Yeah. And part of that might be me not being pushy or whatever, but like, hey man, you want to play Great Battles of the American Revolution? They're like, oh yeah, sure, my guy, yeah, I'll be there right there. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, cool, just let me know. And then they never let me know. But I just wonder what your thoughts are, because I think it kind of has that reputation, just Hex and Counter in general. It's kind of like an old man's game. It's grognard. It's dying out almost sometimes. But when I look at it, and maybe I'm just a grognard at heart, I see so much life and like interest, and it gets me really excited and pumped up. And it doesn't even need to be Hex and Counter, but just any of this historical stuff. Another game that I want to review at some point is Here I Stand, and I don't want to preface that, but that's like this huge 6-player multi-hour game with like different factions simulating the Protestant Reformation and the Wars of Religion in the 1500s, also by GMT. And we've played that once, and then we played the sequel once, and I'm hoping to play that again in a few months here. But it's like this huge experience, and just by playing that game, I've gotten so much more interested in that time period, and learned like, oh wow, Henry VIII was happening around the exact same time as this. I didn't even like really realize that. I know who Henry VIII was. That's the guy who killed all of his wives, etc., etc. Had all the, and had Queen Elizabeth, etc. It's like, oh yeah, but that was at the same time as Martin Luther and John Calvin and the indulgences, and then and then there's Suleiman over there in Ottoman, and he's like taking over the Balkans, and it's just all at the same time, and it just drew a lot of connections. I'm just waxing about history here, but I feel like miniature war games are so focused on their own worlds, their own stories, and it's stuff like one-page rules. They don't, and I'm sure they're working on it, won't have all that history to draw upon. They're kind of making it up, and you have to fill it in yourself. For me, it's like history is more like stuff that's real, that's already happened. It's almost got so much more to draw upon that I'll never be able to like get it all and be sated. And it's just really interesting for me to just learn about all of that before even going into the sci-fi and the fantastical. Not that I don't like that. I'm not going to lie to you. I love me some ogres and some, goblins on giant spiders. Those will never go away in my heart. But I enjoy this in a different way, but at the same time, such a similar way. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Maybe it doesn't.
Are you saying you're going through wargamer puberty and
maybe
growing up from fantasy and sci-fi to historicals?
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. But I still but I still love the fantasy and the sci-fi at the same time. But I think I appreciate this more and more.
I think the joke I just made there is, I think, an erroneous perspective that a lot of people have, which is that the sci-fi fantasy stuff is like
for kids,
immature, and like for kids and not serious, and the or maybe that's like what the imaginary grognards would be saying, and then what the other side is like, well, yeah, but things like Hex and Counter Wargames and historical wargames generally are for the old grognards that are just cranky and like are button counters and things like that. And I don't think either of those necessarily have to be true.
Right.
Those are obviously caricatures of the extremes. But I think, they work well together. I think we were talking a little bit earlier about the context that comes out of something like a historical encounter that really makes it feel grounded, and like the choices you're making are meaningful and have reasons and motivations behind them that can often lack, especially in one-off war games and, sci-fi and fantasy and things like that, or in something that's a little lighter on the setting and that sort of a thing. And a lot of that can end up not feeling very grounded. And so I think historical war games have all of that real context and history to draw on to help it feel grounded, and like there's a real living thing happening there. And I think there's a lot to learn from that type of an experience and an approach to then take back and apply to sci-fi and fantasy wargaming. And we've mentioned that a little bit even in this episode, talking about scenario design.
Right.
And I think trying to design scenarios for other wargames that feel a little bit more like a historical fight recreation, which we've mentioned before, but in the Warhammer Fantasy Battle 6th edition rulebook, each of the scenarios has like a historical refight version of it, where it says like, this was a historical battle in the Warhammer Fantasy universe with these two armies fighting each other and that kind of a thing. But I think when you create that context, you understand the surrounding motivations and what's going on around a battle, then a lot of those cool narrative things, or the things that might not feel fair or might not feel like it makes sense, or like I can't be competitive when this is happening, suddenly don't matter as much because it makes sense. Like you understand why it's that way. And now you're just immersing yourself in that situation and taking on that role of, given the circumstances, what is the best option I have available to myself? Where I think coming from the other approach of like, I can just make up the objectives. I can make up my entire army however I want. I can lay out the terrain however I want. And all of that is just part of this now potentially bland experience where you end up with like the most basic, boring terrain possible at some of these tournaments, and everything is like that's a good point. it's dialed down, you know, in that sense. The immersion level is dialed down. I think that adding back in all of that context, you can still have a very similar experience in a sci-fi or fantasy game.
Yes.
So I see a lot of value there in saying that these aren't mutually exclusive. I'm not answering your original question now, so I'll circle back to that.
No, it's okay.
But when I look at
this
type of a game, I've always been very intrigued by Hex and Counter Wargames, and that's why I've dabbled a little bit, you know, with the computer versions, because those are much more accessible to just like download one from GOG or something like that and try it out. That
the
sort
computer
of a thing.
does all that overhead.
Also that, yeah.
All the math.
I love this type of a map at this type of a scale, and just sort of seeing, like you said, the potential for sweeping movements and actually feeling like I'm outflanking somebody, or that like the center's falling but my flanks are holding, and like what are we going to do now, kind of a thing. So I'm very intrigued and have been. I've never had the opportunity to really dive in with a Hex and Counter wargame like this, so I'm excited to. I at this point am still undecided on whether the overhead thinking mental load will end up being worth overcoming to get to the point where it all is just flowing. And I think it will. Sure. I think it'll be fine. I mean, having played Here I Stand and Virgin Queen, also by GMT, I think those were similar to what you're describing here, where there's a lot of things, but none of those things are individually complicated.
Yeah.
And so once you've played a turn or two, it's like, oh yeah, now I got this. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
And so I anticipate that that's going to be the same thing that happens here.
I'm hoping as well.
And there's going to be a little bit of a hump at the beginning, but then we'll be off to the races.
Yeah.
And we'll, move right through it. So I'm excited for it. I'm excited to see how it plays out. I love the grand scale of all this different types of terrain, and, moving through, kind of like seeing where things end up colliding and how that happens. And I think it creates a different type of spectacle. I think the biggest downside I see to Hex and Counter war games is that you lack the spectacle that you get with a miniatures war game.
Nothing beats fantasy deployment setup, man. After both sides have set up their force and they're aligned on this huge table, and you have nice model terrain, nothing
it looks
better
very cool
to me.
Yeah. So I think that this misses that, but I think there are other things, as we've just spent some time talking about, that it adds back in that you gain from it. So I'm excited to try it out, and our plan is to do that. Indeed. And our next episode will be our sort of battle report or retrospective on how that went and what happened in our version of the battle for Saratoga.
Do you want to roll off live to see who plays what side?
Yeah, sure. You got a dice?
I can get a die. One moment. Live. We'll roll a red die. How about you roll this time?
It's true. You rolled last time we did this on the show.
How do you want to do it?
1, 2, or 3. You're the British.
Okay.
4, 5, or 6. You're the Americans.
Okay.
It's cocked. We're gonna reroll it.
Okay. I was gonna say, I'm the British, unless I misheard you. 2. Is that I'm the Americans?
I honestly don't remember what I said.
I think
now.
you said 1, 2, 3. You're the British. We'll double check the audio.
I guess this is the problem with doing things live.
Indeed. Well, we'll figure that out, and you'll find out in next episode.
We rolled a 2, so whatever we had just said, we rolled a 2.
We will do that.
Great. Good.
But no, I'm excited to play this too. And then my final thought will be is I'm excited to continue to explore new systems as well. This is the only version of really this that I have, but I know Hex and Counter goes all the way up to grand strategic, like the entire east front of World War II, down to itty bitty bitty, like individual firefights, like with one chip being like a squad of like 2 to 3 guys, almost like Warhammer scale, right? Where it's like you're moving just squads of blokes around. So I like that versatility, and I like also, this is pedantic, I like being able to pack it up in a box, put it away on a shelf.
Yeah, that's one thing that these have over miniature war games is the storage space. Yeah,
I will admit they're pretty big, and they don't, I imagine after I've gotten everything punched out, probably won't fit in the box as snugly as I would like, but
imagine how much space all of this terrain would take up.
Oh my God.
Let alone the figures to play this in 28 or even 10 millimeter.
We would, yeah. And even then, I don't know if we would get the same scale. Now, we might gain in some of the spectacle for sure, but maybe in some of the strategic
go down
implications.
To 2 millimeter.
I've seen some. But let's not belay the point anymore. I just get really excited about this sort of stuff, and I kind of wanted to share it. And when we first started this cast, these were the type of offshoots I always wanted to get into. But Any final thoughts from you? I think I'm good.
I think, yeah, we covered it. I'm excited
Excellent.
and excited to see how it goes and then share it with you guys. But
Okay.
if you've played any Hex and
Yeah.
Counter War games, we'd love to hear about your experience, especially if you've played one of these ones, the Battles of the American Revolution by GMT. Mm-hmm. And we'd love to hear how that went for you, or if there are other games you'd like us to look into.
By
we
other
can't guarantee that we're
publishers,
going to
too.
buy a brand new game just to do a podcast
that's
episode
true.
about it. But we'll at least keep an eye out for a used
Yeah.
copy or something.
Right.
But yeah, we'd love to hear what you thought of this episode, since it's a little bit of a departure from our normal fare.
Yeah.
But we hope that you're enjoying just hearing about some other aspects adjacent to miniature wargaming, and we assume our interest in it means that there's at least some other interest in it out there as well.
Yep. Leave us a comment with what you think. But this has been Refused Flank, and I'm Grant.
And I'm Cam.
Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.